They called it the Goins place because the family name was older than the road that led to it. The clapboard house sat low behind a tangled lane of honeysuckle and briar, and the brothers, 3 of them, hulking and silent, kept to the fields like shadows come loose. The mother, Mrs. Goins, moved through the yard with the air of someone who kept secrets folded into her dress. Folks in town knocked their hats together when they spoke of her. Some knocked harder when her sons passed. Rumors start as small things, an odd gesture, a shoe found by the well, a child seen trembling on a step. But with the Goins, whispers hardened into a pattern. Soldiers who'd passed through said the brothers kept odd hours and that Mrs. Goins had the look of a woman who'd bartered with something she could not repay. People began to speak of strange weddings in the old barn and of cuffs found buried beneath floorboards. They said the 3 brothers were married, hooked, in some private rite to a shadow that wore their mother's face. I came to the area as a journeyman clerk, noting deeds and births, meant to keep the ledger of small towns in order. Paper remembers what people try to forget. The first ledger I found in the county office had a Goins entry inked in a trembling hand. Births clustered odd and close, names repeating as if the same syllables had been said again and again, until they lost meaning. The minister had scratched a cross beside one line and underlined another with the same haste others used to hide a stain. When I asked about the house, people down the lane shook their heads and looked away. Trouble, one old woman said. Tastes like the river here, cold and patient. Children were warned. Don't let your dog near their gate. The sheriff wrote notes and tossed them into a drawer marked private. He told me in a voice meant to be iron that some family matters the law would not touch. So the ledger filled with names and small notations, payments, funerals, and a strange column. The county clerks left blank because none of them wanted to know what to write there. The first night I stayed at the boarding house, the town bell clanged at odd hours. A woman came in, wet from the rain, and told how she'd been called to the Goins for sewing and found the 3 brothers waiting with blank faces. She hadn't gone in. Her palms were still white from holding the door. The boarding house keeper tucked a blanket over her shoulders and slid a cup of tea across without asking questions. The next morning, the woman had gone, leaving a single envelope on the pillow with words scrawled in a hand that trembled. Never say mother in the barn. On the 3rd week, I watched the Goins place from a distance and saw a line of lantern light cross the yard at midnight. The brothers walked with a slow rhythm as if counting steps to a tune only they heard. Mrs. Goins moved between them with a lantern, humming an old hymn that had the same melody as a lullaby I'd heard once from a woman who'd lost more than she could say. At the barn, the lanterns pooled together and went small. From inside there came a murmur of voices, men and women, but the doorway remained dark. Town gossip is a creature that feeds on certainty. It wants proof. One morning, a boy, the miller's son, ran into the square pale as chalk. They married her, he cried. Not like we marry. He pointed at the barn, but no one moved at first. Then a figure came out. Mrs. Goins, hatless, hair wet with dew. She carried a small wooden box and walked straight to the church, with it in both hands as if bearing sacrament. No hymn was sung. No bells were rung. The minister took the box, turned ashen, and locked it away in the vestry. That night the church windows were shuttered. Curiosity is a ledger with many pages, and small towns fold each one differently. I opened the vestry drawer later that week with the key a baker had left the minister for safekeeping. The box contained a string of 3 simple bands, rings crudely hammered from farm iron, and a scrap of writing stained with river silt. The words were short, sharpened like a complaint. We bound what cannot be named. There were also 3 tiny handkerchiefs, each embroidered with the same initial. I put the rings in my pocket and walked back into a town that no longer sounded like it had before. The brothers learned to watch me after that. Their glances carried a patient question. What will you do with what you found? One afternoon, the youngest of them, thin, with a scar across his temple, followed me down a lane and stopped within earshot. He said simply, "Some debts count themselves." He did not smile. When I asked what he meant, he only turned and went back to the fields. That night, the hens in every yard stopped laying, and the well water tasted faintly of iron. A child went missing that autumn, People lit torches and searched until the church bell nodded in a slow, frantic rhythm. The boy's shoelace was found tied to a post near the barn. The small handkerchiefs embroidered with the family. Initials were pinned to the post, like a cruel banner. The town swore nothing like this had happened before, and yet, as they talked in whispers, older voices began to name quiet disappearances. Babies found unmarked in the river, a woman who'd left for market and never returned. Patterns lined up like teeth. Fear became a map. Justice in a place where kin and fear are braided is a two-headed thing. The sheriff called a meeting at the square under the deaf elm. Faces pressed in close. Someone proposed sending men to take the brothers to the county seat. Others said the law would never touch such kinship. Lydia, whose husband had once been indebted to the Goins, stood up and spoke few words but sharp ones. "If the law won't act, we will." The crowd rustled like storm grass. They divided into groups, some with ropes and others with lanterns, and set off toward the barn. When they came, they found the barn door open, light pooling from within, but the air felt wrong, denser, as if full of waiting. Inside, rows of chairs had been set as if for a ceremony. On each seat lay a folded cloth, a small iron band, and a sprig of dried honeysuckle. The smell of river mud rose from the floorboards. There was no one in the room, just an emptiness that felt like being watched. Someone nudged a ring with a boot, and it rolled to the edge and stopped as if some unseen hand kept it from falling. Out in the lane, the men spread, checking fences and hovels. A low wind lifted the ribbons on the farmhouse gate. From the fields came a soft sound, like many feet crossing wet grass. The eldest brother stepped out barefoot and stood in the open as if waiting. He lifted his head and spoke into the dark. "We did what we had to. Keep the house whole." There was no defense in his voice, only a tired certainty. Farther along the lane, someone sobbed. The town understood then that the secret was not merely sin. It had become a service, an economy, a law of survival. They tried to take action. They gathered rope. They planned to bring the brothers into town in chains and let the law mark them. But plans fray when the things you fear are older than your courage. The ropes frayed in hands that gripped them. Nails came loose from poles. A sudden rain began that washed away footprints as if the ground refused witnesses. The sheriff cursed and the minister prayed, but their voices were small, against the weight of whatever kept the Goins' household sealed from judgment. On the final night of the month, when the moon lay low and the town was at its most tired, the eldest sister, the one no one spoke of, stepped from the darkness. She had been absent from the ledger for years, recorded as gone to work the mills and never returning. Now she came back with her hair cut short and eyes that had learned how to look away. She walked straight to the barn, gathered up the 3 iron rings, and broke them over her knee. The sound cut through the night like a bell. For the first time, the town heard a small, keen hope. Maybe something inside the house could be broken, but chains can be broken and promises cannot. When the eldest sister turned to face the house, she saw that the porch light had been snuffed out and a figure stood in the doorway. Mrs. Goins herself, calm and whole, hands folded like someone greeting guests. The eldest sister felt the night press in. Some deaths, she understood at once, rearranged the living as if they were pages folded back in a book. She dropped the ring pieces into her palm and they were wet with river mud. The town watched the woman walk away and knew, with the slow, certain dread of those who have read the last line in a bad story, that the counting had only begun. By the time summer came, the Goins farm had become a place no one visited after dark. Children whispered about lights flickering through the cracks of the barn, blue and red, like hell's own heartbeat pulsing behind old wooden planks. The mother, Eleanor Goins, never left the farmhouse. She would watch from the upstairs window, her face pale and distant, as her sons carried buckets of river water in strange bundles, wrapped in white cloth. Locals said the Goins brothers were digging for oil, but the truth was far more grotesque. Behind that barn door, the air stank of iron and wet soil. Chains hung from beams and strange markings were carved into the floorboards, symbols that looked older than the Bible itself. In the center stood Eleanor, their mother, her white gown soaked at the hem, her voice low and trembling as she spoke words no one understood. Her sons knelt, heads bowed, as if in prayer. But the prayer was to something that did not forgive. One night a thunderstorm broke over the hills, and the rain washed something terrible into the river. A body, pale and twisted with an iron ring fused into its wrist. Sheriff Dalton found it near the bridge, and when he pried open the dead man's mouth, he found his tongue missing. The sheriff said nothing to the press, but that night he rode quietly to the Goins farmhouse. He didn't return till dawn, and when he did, he refused to speak another word for the rest of his life. Neighbors started hearing things. Screams, whispers, and something that sounded like laughter echoing across the fields. The Goins brothers stopped coming into town entirely. When the preacher tried to pay a visit, he came back sick and shaking, his hands covered in ash and his eyes unfocused. All he said was, "They don't need God anymore." And after that, no one else dared step onto their land. Weeks passed before anyone saw the Goins brothers again. When they finally appeared in town, their eyes were hollow, faces pale as candle wax, lips cracked like dry soil. They didn't speak. They just bought sacks of salt. And when the shopkeeper asked what for, one of them whispered, "To keep her from rotting." That night, the barn lights came back and brighter than ever. Inside that barn, Eleanor lay upon an altar made of wood and stone. Her body had not decayed. Her skin shimmered faintly as though something beneath it still lived. The brothers chanted softly, each word older than any language known in Georgia. And then her eyes opened. A single tear rolled down her cheek, not clear but black. And when it hit the floor, the ground itself began to pulse. After that night, animals began dying. Cows found in circles of ash, birds dropping from the sky. The soil turned gray near the barn, and no grass grew there again. A traveler once claimed he saw Eleanor walking through the fields at dawn, barefoot, her sons crawling behind her on their hands and knees. He told the sheriff, but the sheriff had already burned his badge. No one spoke of it again. By autumn, the farmhouse windows were boarded, and the barn stood silent. But some nights, if the wind blew right, you could still hear the echo, not screaming, not crying, but the sound of a mother humming a lullaby for sons who could never leave her side. By the time winter arrived, the Goins farm was no longer a home. It was a shrine, soaked in blood, sealed in silence. Locals said the brothers didn't eat, didn't sleep. They just walked in circles around the barn every night, dragging chains behind them, whispering to something inside. When one man dared to follow the sound, he came back without a tongue. He never spoke again. Then came the smell. It rolled through the valley like smoke. Metallic, heavy, the scent of decay. The sheriff's men found trails of blood leading from the well, straight into the barn's cellar. When they pried open the door, they saw something that turned one deputy's hair white that instant. Eleanor was standing there, alive but wrong. Her veins glowed faint red, her eyes wide like those of a newborn animal. And she was smiling. She spoke, but her voice came from everywhere. From the walls, the floor, even from the air itself. "My sons have kept their promise," she said. Then she raised her hand, and the brothers fell to their knees, faces wet with tears and blood. What came next no one ever confirmed. But the cellar walls were found covered with handprints, too small to belong to grown men. When the townsfolk set the barn ablaze, they said the fire burned for 3 days, and the smoke was not black but white, as if the place itself was purging something divine. When it was finally over, the ashes were cold, but the earth beneath stayed warm. Warm like breath. No one rebuilt on that land again. When the sheriff's men dug up the Goins property, they found more than graves. They found walls painted in blood, carvings of a twisted family tree, and symbols that no one could read. The 3 sons, the ones who called their mother both mama and wife, had left behind journals written in fevered, broken script. She told us the blood must stay pure, that outsiders carried sin. We only obeyed until sin became all we knew. The final entry was signed not by the sons but by the mother herself. "They will dig and they will find us." But blood remembers what it owns. The townspeople burned the farmhouse to ashes that night. But locals still say, on moonless nights, you can hear 4 voices singing from the woods in a language that no one alive understands. And if you follow the sound, you'll find a small mirror buried in the dirt, and inside it your own reflection smiling back when you're not.